really just solve my problems?
This is but what, how are we gonna get that to?
They're obviously gonna click on the tech support and say I can't get in. So then we'll give them the live stream link. Really just solve my problems?
Probably because
yeah. It just wow, Zoom was that integrated. I remember doing this 5 years ago. And we had to, they didn't have like a lot of the setup yet. So it was a lot of like, oh, you put this pin in here and blah, and blah, and blah. Wow. Okay. Now the question is, I need to test this. Oh, I need to, sorry. I know you need me to give you host. Who am I giving host to?
I'm sorry.
Oh no, Interpretified is in there.
Yeah, they need to
to AV, is that right? No, they can't hear me.
Let me.
Are they on here?
Yeah, they're on WhatsApp.
I'll ask them. Oh, okay. AV. Okay. Give host. All right, I'm making AV host. And I'm going to mute myself. Hey, Max.
Recording in progress.
You watched it.
Oh, I'm not in the live stream.
Oh, no, you're in the Zoom. You're in the Zoom.
Zoom.
Okay.
Wait, where did you send it to?
The WhatsApp group.
Okay.
Oh, you can do it on your phone.
Ooh, even better.
To see if it works. Yes.
Even better.
I'm gonna.
Okay. Hi, Alice.
Oh, there are 19 attendees here. Hello, participants. Apologies. We're getting set up here. You'll have to bear with us while we are getting set up.
Alice, can I just check if the audio quality sounds all right?
Perfect. Yes, you sound great, Max. Feel free to
mic.
Yourself too.
Sorry about that.
Feel free to rename yourself as well.
Thanks.
Me, hello, everything all good? I see you have your hand raised.
Hello, good evening. This is Mihailo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
We can hear you.
Easier than writing in WhatsApp. So as you can see, interpretation is set. So just let me know when you want us to test. My tech will unmute in each channel. He will just tell me in which order. So he will move to next channel once we confirmed we hear the current one. Okay.
You can test now.
Okay, Peter, let me know. Okay, Spanish, Portuguese, German. So let's go first to Spanish. Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Yes, Peter, I heard you. Interpreter can also speak just to confirm that we have a good sound. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Spanish channel tested. We're good with that. Let's move to Portuguese. Yes, Portuguese testing. So I did hear interpreter. I also hear my text. So just confirmation to Alice and Michelle. We will have all the interpreters. And the last one will be German. Moving to German. Perfect. Thank you. German tested. Can you just confirm that you were also good with all channels on your end, Alice, Michelle? Thank you. Better, I got confirmation that we can give back host role to Alice.
Hi, Christina.
Am I the first one?
Feel free to change your name as you see fit.
Hi, Christina. Pleasure to see you.
Hi, Maximilian. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Good to see you.
It's
Well, not in person, but in camera.
is it sunny there?
It has been remarkably so.
That is
Of
remarkable.
course, it's, I
I
think after the time change this weekend, it'll be pitch dark at about 5 p.m. But that's what we accept over here.
We accept that. You may have heard from Michelle that I fell down and broke my right shoulder, but I have all the medical stuff under the camera. Just
Gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I did hear. I hope it's a relatively smooth recovery, although the shoulder is not the simplest part of the body by any means.
it's amazing how many things you do with your shoulder. Like I never realized that when you sneeze, the shoulder is involved.
Oh, gosh.
Ouch. Anyway, I'm sure you have better things to do than to chat to me. I'll mute myself and be quiet.
I'm going to turn my camera off for a minute and then I'll be back in a couple.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us so far. We're just going to wait for the rest of the panelists to arrive.
Hi, Carolina. You can go ahead and change your name if you wish.
How are you doing, Carolina?
Hi, I'm doing well, thank you. It's a lovely spring day over here in Uruguay.
I believe it's a little bit colder here in England.
Getting ready for Halloween.
Yes, exactly.
It is celebrated here as well among kids, but yeah.
Can I check that I am pronouncing your last name correctly? Is it Carolina Aguera?
Yes,
Okay, perfect.
On the oversight board, Maximilian, there's a Catalina and a Christina, and the moderators are forever getting us confused. I'm
confused.
sorry that and now we have a Carolina and a Cristina. So extra challenge.
That is absolutely okay. That is my job. So I will do my best. Welcome, Umang.
Hello, how's everybody?
Doing well.
Wait, where are you, man?
I'm in New York at the moment.
Oh, that's okay. It's nice.
Really?
I'm in
Where are you?
Washington, DC. Washington, DC. So
Great.
same time zone.
Wonderful.
And it's Umang or Among?
Umang. Perfect, the first one.
Umang.
Yeah.
Okay, Umang.
Brilliant.
Okay, great.
And Irene, is that you? You've joined us as well. When you get a chance, just go ahead and you can rename yourself from
Oh.
panelist, which is the default we have to force everyone to have, and to your real name. All right, in about 3 minutes, we'll get started. Giuliano, are you able to hear us?
Yes, perfectly.
Perfect. Okay, I think we're just about ready to get started. We'll give it one more minute. Let me begin. All right, now that we have everyone here, let me begin by introducing myself. So my name is Maximilian Kronerdale. I worked for several years at the Behavioral Insights team, which is one of the 3 organizations that's hosting this event. I played a role in drafting the educational materials that hopefully our participants have had a chance to familiarize themselves with. And fortunately for me, that means that I've been able to critically engage with some of the same materials that you've been discussing in your small groups. I was also one of the moderators for Meta's previous community forum about bullying and harassment in the metaverse. And I'm very excited to be speaking to you all from England, where I'm now studying at the Oxford Internet Institute. This is a really fascinating and, sometimes like a tricky topic to navigate, as people may have noticed from their readings and even their conversations in the group so far. And so given that, I just wanted to take a minute to remind everyone that, in this session, we'll have the panel of experts that you see before you, who are going to be answering your questions on topics related to the perspectives that should be represented in AI chatbot responses, the sources the AI chatbots should use, and how personalized AI chatbot responses should be for each individual. So when answering these questions, the panelists might touch on some topics that some folks might find disturbing or distressing. And so just in the course of discussion, just to let you know that some of the topics that come up might include the potential harm to marginalized or vulnerable groups, the topic of misinformation and fake news, and the topic of data privacy, for example. So if at any time you would like to take a break from the meeting, please feel free to do so. And if you would like further support, you can contact the organizers of the forum via the email that you see there at the bottom of the screen. And they'll direct you to appropriate support resources in your area. But with that said, I am very pleased to introduce our panelists. And give me just a moment. So with us today, we have Cristina Arriaga. Cristina Arriaga is an inaugural trustee of the Oversight Board, an independent institution dedicated to advancing free expression. With a 25-year career advocating for expressive rights, she has represented the United States at the UN Human Rights Commission, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and served as the vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Presently, Ms. Arriaga is the CEO of Intrinsic, an advisory firm. We're also joined by Umang Bhatt. Umang is an associate professor and faculty fellow at the Center for Data Science at New York University and a research associate in safe and ethical AI at the Alan Turing Institute. Previously, he was a PhD candidate in machine learning group at the University of Cambridge and spent some time as a fellow at the Mozilla Foundation and the Partnership on AI. Carolina Aguera is an associate professor at Universidad Católica del Uruguay, co-director of the Center for Technology and Society at the University of San Andres, Argentina, and senior associate fellow at the Center for Global Cooperation Research at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. She's also a member of the UNESCO Ad Hoc Expert Working Group for the draft on recommendations for AI ethics, approved by 193 member states in 2021. Irene Suleiman is joining us here. She is an AI safety and policy expert. She's also head of global policy, at Hugging Face, where she is conducting social impact research and leading public policy. Irene serves on the Partnership on AI's Public Policy Steering Committee and the Center for Democracy and Technology AI's Governance Lab Advisory Committee. She is also Tech Ethics and Policy Mentor at Stanford University and an International Strategy Forum Fellow at Schmidt Futures. She advises responsible AI initiatives at the OECD and IEEE. Her research includes AI values alignment, responsible releases, and combating misuse and malicious use. She was recently named MIT's Tech Review's, one of Tech Review's 35 innovators under 35 in 2023 for her great research. And last but not least, we are joined by Juliano Maranhão, the law professor at the University of Sao Paulo. He is also a member of the executive committee of the International Association for Artificial Intelligence and Law, founder and president of Logarithm, an association focused on research into artificial intelligence and law. Thank you for joining us. We have quite an esteemed panel with us today. Very excited to be getting into this with you. So I'm going to be pulling up some of the questions that we have from participants. And remember that we've just had a few minutes to kind of gather these as people have been speaking in small groups and from all over the world. And so we've been translating those questions and sort of, putting them into groups. And we'd like to get your thoughts on each of those questions. So first of all, just to start us off, remember that today's session is about what principles should guide how AI chatbots offer advice and guidance. And to start us off, we have a question from the US. Are chatbots regulated by any government agencies? I wonder if we could start off with Christina Arriaga for now, and then if what we could do for the future is just if you raise your hand, I can call on you and then you can speak to the same question right afterwards. I'll then shift us on to the next question when we've covered some ground.
So that's the $64,000 question. Are chatbots regulated? No, they are not. Currently, the technology is moving much faster than the regulatory scheme. In places like Europe, for instance, you're seeing things like the Digital Services Act, which was passed by the European Union, and you're seeing attempts in Asia, and particularly in India, to approach a regulatory scheme. But currently in the United States, there is no regulation.
Thank you for the really clear and concise answer there. Is there any nuance anyone would like to add to that question, or we can move us on to the next question? Yes, please, Irene.
So completely agree with Christina. And also, I just want to make a clarification for what we mean by chatbots. I work mostly with large language models, which have been often the underlying systems for a lot of the chatbots that we see today. And there's a lot of different types of legislation that could apply to different types of bots. So for example, in California, there are bot disclosure laws, but for the most part, that was largely for rules-based chatbots, so that's much less complex than a language model. And if we're talking specifically about the more complex language models, that's very much in conversation. So right after this, I'm going to the airport to go to the London AI Safety Summit, and we're going to chat about that.
Thank you, Irene. And Julian, I see you have your hand up. I think you're muted. If you could just unmute and then we'll be able to hear you.
Yes, I fully agree. There is no full regulation regarding all the AI issues that are raised with a chatbot. At least there is some protection regarding data protection or privacy. For instance, there are some countries that are strict regulation on data protection in regarding this aspect. If the chatbot requires too many privacy information or data that may be used according to some purposes that are not acceptable, then there is some enforcement that could protect people from providing their personal data or private information.
I think this is the good transition to a related question, which was, how can we hold AI chatbot developers accountable for ensuring data privacy and unbiased / objective information? And I think maybe in addition to this question is should they be the ones who are held accountable as well? Yes, please, Umang.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to quickly touch on the last question, but plus one what everybody said. I just wanted to flag that in some sense, we care about regulating these chatbots, but our behavior as a result of what these chatbots tell us will always be regulated by some existing rule. And that's kind of important to remember, that when we're interacting with these personalized systems or systems that are being developed, there might be some downstream initiative that we take on as individuals, and that might be buying a particular product or doing something in the real world, and that action will almost certainly already fall under regulation. So as someone is somewhat of a techno optimist, you think about having some of these systems, they might make really great personalized suggestions to us, maybe even in some sense using some of our previous historical data about the things that we've purchased in the past, and the things that we've enjoyed looking at in the past. But at the end of the day, we're the ones who sometimes click the button to purchase that product. And remembering that we have agency, and sometimes these people have undue influence on us, is something that we're hoping that we can push on regulators. And it's great that people like Irene and Christina are kind of the forefront of those conversations.
So it sounds like we have some laws that potentially regulate the implications or the downstream actions that might stem from chatbots. Carolina, would you like to come in on that question?
Yes, so slightly, I mean, mixing the first one and the second one, but yes, we do have some laws, but also just to bring in, I mean, laws that don't regulate chatbots per se, but protect speech, data protection, etc. In terms of holding chatbot developers accountable, I'm not. I don't think we have, and I'm speaking here from a Latin American perspective, that we have those mechanisms in place in the region, but we do have emerging observatories that track the use of these chatbots, particularly in those chatbots that are used within governments and for governmental services. And this is, of course, audited and in a different way, and the data that feeds that comes from more regulated sources, as we are seeing in the cases of Chile and Uruguay, for example.
Thank you. Christina?
Thank you for the question. How can we hold chatbot developers accountable? I think the question is, what do you mean by we? Uman is exactly right. If you mean the users, the individuals who are using this information, you have a lot of power. The reason that you're being pulled right now is precisely because governments and industries have not stepped in to regulate what might be one day a largely unregulated market. I mean, this is the first time in humanity that there are no physical boundaries to the products. There's no way to control right now how information travels from one country to the other. I mean, there are attempts, but the reality is that we are dealing with the largest country in the world. I mean, the internet, all these social media platforms. So I think this is an important question to ask ourselves. What kind of information do we want to have access to? Ensuring data privacy is something that the Europeans are more advanced than in the United States in terms of rules and regulations. Some people in the United States think that the legislation in Europe is actually too punitive towards corporations, and that there needs to be a new arrangement. And in terms of unbiased and objective information, oh boy, that's a really hard question. I mean, what is unbiased? What is objective information? And who determines what is unbiased and what is objective? I mean, just to give you an example, what happened with COVID for the last 2 years, you have all these massive international agencies trying to figure out what information goes out there. Social media platforms, which are private companies, not government-owned companies, are also looking at how can we put out information that's reliable. So these are all difficult questions, and that's one of the reasons that Meta is holding this project, and will continue to ensure that there are a lot of diverse voices looking at this. But ultimately, we is us, and we will have a lot of influence and hopefully power as all the AI emerges into what it will eventually become.
Thank you, Christina. I'd like to move us to talking about one of the sort of clusters of proposals that participants were discussing in small groups. And this pertains to the question of when or whether AI chatbots should draw on perspectives from local organizations and when they should draw on perspectives from, national or international organizations. Let's start us there, and then there's some, more specific questions we can get into. Does anyone have thoughts on that, that focus, where they should source their perspectives from, and if it differs by topic? Yes, please, Carolina.
Yes, so thank you for the question, and Maximilian, you raised the I mean, in your last clarification, I mean, if it should be tailored to the content, and it's the use case of the chatbot that we are dealing with. And I know that in this context of LLMs and generative AI, many of us are thinking about chatbots as that kind of platform, but still in many parts of the global south or the rest of majority of the world, when we talk about chatbots, we're talking about services, we're talking about interacting with particular organizations around certain issues. So I think it very much depends if you're talking to a chatbot from a Ministry of Health or a health provider, and the kind of information, and it should definitely be sourced, locally sourced data as much as possible, not only because it will be more context-based and relevant for that group of people, but also because it democratizes as well the development of AI along the value chain in different contexts.
Thank you for starting us off, Carolina. Would you like to add to that, Giuliano?
Yes, I'll just bring an argument about using contextual training of chatbots that has to do with, for instance, any chatbot, responsible chatbot should have some control about abusive or misinformation or abusive discourse. And this is only effective when there is contextual training for this sort of discourse to be detected. And also to prevent discriminatory discourse or some discriminatory effects of the chatbot. It's interesting to have also some local training regarding the culture or the specific language to detect situations that may be discriminatory, or situations where the discourse may be disinformative or may be abusive.
Thank you so much. Irene, what are your thoughts on this question?
So I'm going to go back to language models again, and there's only so much that you can do at a high level once the model is trained, unless you really go back into the training development process. So when I'm thinking about perspectives and thinking about what especially are you training on, and that comes down especially to textual training data, which a lot of the time is not an AI problem, it's a data sourcing problem. A lot of language models are trained on vast amounts of scraped content from the internet, and a lot of what I've been saying publicly is so much internet content is a problem of the digital divide, is a problem of broadband access, and also of who the internet was created for. So a lot of this is languages represent a lot of parts of culture. One of my languages that I speak is Bangla, and there's so much the language of Bengal and Bangladesh. There's so much baked into that on how we relate to family members that isn't represented in other languages that I speak, like French and Spanish, where there's more gendered terms. So there's a question of this training data, and that will have to come more localized, and that will have to work with people on what represents them, and also recognizing what is exploitative. There's some great pieces from Wired around the Maori people and the use of indigenous language data and what consent looks like here. And that's just looking at language, not just particular categories of culture. So I did some work back when I was at OpenAI and with some of the first cultural value alignment work called Process for Adapting Language Models to Society that breaks down categories of what can represent cultures. So I'd encourage folks to think about how to get that kind of feedback from the more local organizations. And then once you're at that higher level of having a trained model, that's where I draw on international perspectives like UN Declaration on Human Rights, and you can do some more technical techniques like fine tuning, or what's popular now is reinforcement learning with human feedback tailored to some high level principles.
There's so many places we could take the conversation from here. I want Umang to jump in, and then I'll pick a direction for us to move to.
Yeah, no, I think this is everybody's kind of covered quite a lot around this question. I kind of want to flip this question and take it in a different direction. So as someone who does predominantly technical researchers compared to much of the other panels, like some of the esteemed policy leaders we have here. One of the things that we've been thinking quite a bit about is how could we communicate differing perspectives to individuals who are interacting with these kinds of systems. If you're interacting with a large language model, we have a unique position to expose you to perspectives that are different from your own. And we might not be good at representing that at the moment because we don't have good representation from the Maori or from other cultures. But if we know that this is a patch, we might be able to build systems that not only provide you with the perspective that is of your community, but also that of your neighboring communities and of your nation and of the international community more broadly, kind of giving you a holistic perspective. Maybe you don't agree with everything you're seeing, but at least you've been exposed to it in a way that keeps you aware of the way other people think and kind of help us build a more cohesive society.
Let's actually dig into that a little bit more, because we had a question from participants again on this local versus international versus national here, which is, will local governments have any input on local perspectives used in AI, or will a separate organization be responsible for aggregating those perspectives? It's a bit of a, most technical question here, like how actually would this work for local, national, and international? Christina?
So I think there are two ways of viewing the LLM models, right? The language models. One is one where the government is informing the model, and then another one when individuals and corporations are informing the model. And perhaps there's a third one where governments and corporations and individuals can work together. Ultimately, it comes to transparency, right? Whenever we engage in this new tool that is like this gigantic digital encyclopedia or dictionary or calculator, it's just one more tool. You want to be engaging with it, understanding where its information comes from and how to get to it. And it also depends what you're using it for. So let's say that you're using it for entertainment purposes or for cooking purposes or for health purposes. Those are all going to be different questions. And you're going to want to look at the AI chatbot that is informed by what you want. So for instance, if you ask a very simple question to a chatbot, what would be a healthy dish to make tonight? It may need to take into account that you live in a place where you have access to fish and fruits and vegetables, or you may need to take into account the fact that you're diabetic and you need a certain regulation of sugar in your diet, or it may also take into account economics. So these are very complex questions, and it goes back to what Irene was talking about. What is the information you're feeding this tool? Because that's the only information this tool can give you. And the more AI advances, the more information you're going to be able to gather. But it's not only up to the government or to the United Nations or to the World Health Organization, it's going to be up to the creator of the information where that person is scraping the data from. And again, as we spoke at the beginning, a lot of these products are completely unregulated right now. So it's going to take some time for us to engage with it in an informed way.
Thank you for that thoughtful response. I think Carolina was next, and then we can move to Giuliano.
So building on Christina's comments, we cannot this question is totally engaged with the political economy of how LLMs and big AI platforms are working these days. So it will very much depend on which player the local government is addressing. Does it want to sort of affect how OpenAI is working around its data and the local sources on that? Is it with Meta? Both platforms have very different governance approaches and business models as well. So that's totally something that any government that wishes to engage with large tech, big tech, engaging on AI should definitely address. And then there's the local players, which of course, local governments can have a greater interjection and voice, in terms of adding value from their local data sources.
Thank you, Carolina. And Giuliano, before we move to you, if I could add to this question about what happens maybe when local perspectives and international perspectives contradict. If you want to comment on that, totally fine. If not, that's also fine.
Well, first, I would like to say that I believe that the local perspective should not come from a particular institution, be it the government or be any other institution, because it adds a particular perspective that may be biased, that may be interfere with a particular view of the culture. So local perspective should be based on the culture as a whole. And this can be trained or obtained if the large language model is fine-tuned with particular data of a particular culture, of a particular language. And that's where the local values and the local perspectives come from, not from an input, a particular input from a particular institution. And actually, when these data is used for training a particular tool, of course, the role of government is to provide the laws which translate the values of a particular community. So, but it is the developers of the tool that are going to make sure that the tool respect local laws. And that's the whole that the state can do on that, not to interfere in the development of the chatbot. And I think that regarding possible conflicts, if actually the data are trained both with the model as a whole, and then there is a fine-tuning with the local data, the very training is going to produce what is particular, but actually sources of information are contradictory everywhere. So it will be not surprising if the chatbot sometimes also give you conflicting information, and that's something that the person who interacts with the chatbot can evaluate and decide rationally for themselves. We cannot be also paternalists here. So people deal with information everywhere, and is going to deal with information from chatbots.
Thank you, Giuliano. So I'm hearing even, possibly an alternative solution in that, which would be to present maybe the user with like two different versions of the same story, and they could pick between them or decide between them, which I don't know if that was among the listed proposals. I want to stay on this just for a little while longer, because many of the proposals do pertain to what happens in a conflict, and also add in this question of human rights. If there is, a local perspective, but the local perspective conflicts with an international perspective on human rights, should one side win in that case? Or should we have the solution that was just proposed where you have both options? Irene, do you feel comfortable coming in on that question?
That's exactly what I was coming on, and I have a spicy take because I've had to address this at least in a research setting, and there's a huge danger of overriding cultural values. There's an enormous power asymmetry in who has the resources to develop chatbots and where they're being developed. And where they're being deployed and who's affected. It has always been notoriously difficult, especially in a government at any setting, to get feedback from the people who have the least power, who need their voices heard the most. But also when it comes to some fundamental rights questions, there has to be decisions made at a higher level. So one of the decisions that I made working on GPT-3 was around the UN Declaration of Human Rights has a set of protected class categories where you cannot discriminate. And in the 90s, it was quite controversial to add LGBTQ groups to that list, which is not a universal world value. And that's where I've just made the decision that at a high level, we should protect LGBTQ groups. I know that there are several parts of the world that vehemently disagree with that. And this can be on a case-by-case basis. But this is also recognizing that the folks who are creating these high-level international agreements often have different representation from more world powers and Western governments. And this is often, for example, the UN Declaration of Human Rights has more input on the Permanent Five. And there's, of course, more wealthy countries who get to have that kind of input. But it's a really, really tough decision. And for me, the LGBTQ one was more obvious. Again, growing up in the US, so I do have that cultural bias, but it's just going to be tricky case by case.
Okay, thank you. So we have some perspective here. Someone who's been doing this firsthand and thinks we could do it on a case-by-case basis, for example. Umang, I saw your hand was raised as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that it has to be done on a case by case basis. In some sense, this goes back to my previous answer that we do have to have some notion of multiple perspectives that we're bringing to the table. And the question is how much can you represent the person's individual perspective from their local community, which may not adhere to international law or might not be representative of what has been said in that the UN has put out. But kind of exposing them to these various perspectives that a majority of the world thinks in a particular way, but your community still justly and deserves to have its own perspective, and the chatbot and some of the mechanisms we put around it kind of recognize that. So I'm a strong proponent of making sure that we have multiple answers effectively generated for individuals to kind of have that exposure. But what that does come with is someone sifting through those multiple answers to know that there might not only be one way to make jollof rice, for example, that Nigeria and Ghana have a long-standing tension between how to make jollof rice, for example. So these are things to recognize that are cultural differences and nuances to tease out.
Thank you, Umang. Christina, I want to give you just a quick chance for comment, and then I'll move us on to the next topic.
Yeah, Umang is exactly right that we should have choices. I don't view a conflict as necessarily a negative thing. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Like Irene just said, she's like, I have this zesty view that LGBTQ rights should be respected throughout, and that is part of the culture of the chatbot. But it's also up to the person who's using it to determine what ideas they want to be exposed to and what they want their children to be exposed to. So a lot of it comes back to personal responsibility and engaging with the chatbot, understanding that is nothing but a very powerful tool that we should have power over.
Thank you, Christina. So I want to turn us to another sort of subtopic, which was related to information sources and the kind of sources that chatbots are trained on and emphasize in the responses. And I believe Irene already gave us a really helpful preview of this topic, but maybe we can also just start us off with a pair of questions for participants that would give us a lay of the land here. So 2 questions that I think are related. And again, Irene, you could be a really good person to speak to this. Who controls the content of the sources for AI chatbots, and what are the main sources that are used in the outputs for AI chatbots?
I can speak on that a little bit. So it depends on who's developing the system, and so Hugging Face, think kind of GitHub of ML. We host a lot of models, data sets, spaces, and a lot of these are open source and accessible for everybody. A lot of the times what we see in the open source world are open data sets that are created by one organization, a coalition of people, and that are used by a different organization to develop and train their models. So there's different levels of responsibility throughout the development life cycle. This could look different at a larger tech company that has its own resources to pull together their own training resources. So it really depends on the system, the type of system. A lot of what we're seeing as well for chatbots, depending on the use case, are more tailored systems. So you might be hearing about Claude's, GPT-4s, incredibly impressive, very hard to build, and also really expensive and not necessary for every type of chatbot. So we see a lot of folks using, for example, customer service chatbots or friendly chatbots, just using very small models that don't use so much resources. And you can maybe tailor the training data a little bit more towards that specific use case. So it's also going to depend on how that chatbot's being applied and the kind of organization that has the training ability and data collation.
Thank you. I want to leave space for anyone else to come in on this question, or the sort of second, the next level there, which is after the model has been trained, the large language model. We also, there is also some maybe degree to emphasize sources in the responses that the model uses. For example, some chatbots do try to cite their claims. Doesn't always work super well when it happens. Is that something that's valuable? Is that something that should we be demanding peer-reviewed sources? Should we be looking for local anecdotal sources? Does it depend? Yes, Umang.
Yeah, and I think this it's a wonderful question, but I do think it actually does depend. It depends on the context in which you care about using the information that you're getting. Like if you asked a chatbot your birthday, like you might not expect it has it unless it has access to your personal information, right? Like we can't expect these systems to have the right answer. And even then, like how is it supposed to cite that? Like is it going to say it looked at your credit card history or it looked at other personal information that it has access to? So I think that it really is very, very context specific. And at the end of the day, it comes down to thinking clearly about what has potentially been fed into it. So if it is like maybe the entire internet, we know that the internet, as Irene said earlier, is not necessarily filled with things that all of us agree with. And that's something to recognize, which means that some of our responses might not be that way. Like 10 years ago now, I remember we were at, I was at Microsoft and they had this wonderful tool that they built, which would just take FAQs and turn it into a chatbot experience. So you could take a document that has a bunch of questions and just start interacting with it in a chatbot format. And that's as simple as knowing the source document itself. There's only one source document. So we're obviously at a very different point now, but even then we don't necessarily ask for our sources unless it's like very specific fact that we just want to co-reference or look up to validate ourselves.
Thank you. And Juliana?
Well, I would like just to emphasize that as everybody has pointed out, it depends on the context on how should we control or not the sources. For instance, in a field that in the future I can see many incorporations of chatbots into products. And this may be a question. For instance, if we incorporate chatbots into toys, and particularly in context with interactions with children, then there should be some control of the sources in order to protect these children, or even to provide content that is educative, that is builds the children to access to good information and information that is valuable to them.
Yes, Carolina, although I do want to narrow this even further, we have some questions from Germany, which are about, again, about sources. And one of these questions is, how are sources verified? And how and by whom is it decided which organizations are classified as trustworthy? Although we did, again, hear that it might vary in a case-by-case basis. You know, certain companies who are using a chatbot for a specific purpose might be in charge of that decision. But maybe for a particular example, we could discuss how it might look to have sources verified and how they would be decided as trustworthy or not. Christina?
So one good way of finding out is to ask the chatbot. So for instance, if you're looking at rare disease or you're looking at medical information, you can ask what kind of sources came into building this chatbot. The other one is to test it against what you know. Now, some places like OpenAI, ChatGPT, they're using something called plugins. And that is, for instance, if you're looking for particularly complex legal research, you can get a plugin that looks at legal issues and it will tell you where it's getting its information. And you can even ask to link to the original source. But I think we need to keep thinking we are the people in power here. I mean, it's important to be able to ask where the information is coming from.
Thank you. And Carolina?
Yes, so building on that, I do think we do have experience in, for example, the wiki community, Wikimedia community in general, and how that collaborative space has worked around the internet for many years, and how certain sources have more are more worthy, are more trustworthy for readers, and how Wikipedia editors have contributed to deepening the context of certain articles and those who are stubs. I do think we have a lot to learn from the collective intelligence of the internet, from where many of these large chatbots today are based. So that community, journalists and the research community, I think from universities, we also have experience in addressing kind of for certain, again, thinking about chatbots for certain specific topics, I think as a principle of an ethical AI, you need to bring in transparency and accountability. So sourcing and referencing your text or your image or your creation is certainly a must in my view. And for some cases, I think we can go back to the practices of communities where this is extremely well developed already.
Just muted myself. Thank you, Carolina. We have a question from Brazil, which I think will be helpful again on the same topic, and that is there a guarantee of the legitimacy of the information that the chatbot shares? And I know that there often is not, but maybe an extension of this question is, is that a desirable thing to have? In lieu of that, what should users be doing? I think this raises a lot of good questions about, the quality of the information in many different contexts, and if we should be striving for something that can be fully trustworthy, or what to do when it's not. Yes, Umang.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate answer, in my opinion, and from the work that we've done, is unfortunately can't guarantee that the legitimacy of the things we're seeing. I think I like to compare it back to even the most trustworthy friends, colleagues, and family members we have. We sometimes doubt what they say, and we are sometimes culprits ourselves when we might say, "I'm so thankful that I've gotten this sweater from my grandmother that I don't really enjoy." Am I really giving a legitimate answer that I'm not really going to wear that sweater? So there are some contexts in which we do accept illegitimate answers. And it's important to recognize that these systems are definitely not at flaw, and they still suffer from the same consequences that we do. And sometimes we aren't also able to give the sources where we are able to get this information. We might remember, we may have heard it somewhere. So it's important to have that same skepticism when you're interacting with these kinds of systems. And I think a healthy amount of skepticism is a way you could start to check that legitimacy. It's something that you might, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like you might want to validate the information that you're getting from the system before you take an action in the real world, because your action in the real world at the moment is going to be regulated, but the chatbot's answer to you, if it's legitimate or not, is not necessarily regulated at the moment, even though there are a lot of great people pushing for that here.
Thanks for sharing that perspective, Umang. And Juliana, would you like to come in on that question?
Yes, I just would like to make it clear that chatbots are tools for conversation. They are not search engines for reliable information. So usually you interact with people, with humans, and you cannot trust the legitimacy of anything that it does. But even though it's interesting to have these conversations. So having in mind that it's a tool for conversations and not exactly for searching information, this is already something that can make you more comfortable in discussions where not everything you may trust. But of course, it's interesting to have developments of these tools where they get more and more accurate in their information. And this can be done with fine-tuning with particular sets of documents where you avoid some misinformations or some information that are not accurate. And one thing that could be interesting is for the developers and the suppliers of these chatbots to incorporate some way for users to check the information that is provided when the user would like to have some clarification on the subject.
Thank you, Juliano. Christina, I think we have time for one more comment on this question.
Just building on Juliano's terrific remarks, two things we have not talked about here is one is the limits of the information, right? So we cannot assume that chatbots have access to the internet. Many of them are built with specific information ending on such a date. So if you ask something of it that happened after the date, then it can either tell you it doesn't have it, or the second issue we should address quickly, it's hallucinations, right? It infers from the existing information that it has, often incorrect information. So if you ask something that happened after it was created, it will go back in the past and then sort of create a ghost answer. So again, I think Giuliano says it right, that this is for conversation, not for research, and that there are serious limits to the kind of information that we can have access to.
If I could ask just one follow-up question on that to either Christina or to anyone else, given that we can't trust chatbots in all settings and that is more for conversation and not for search engines, but it is still the case that people are sometimes treating them this way, should chatbots refuse to answer questions in certain topics? I want to see if we can get specific here. Are there topics you would pick that they should not answer, or should they have to caveat their responses? What are some examples of things that maybe we should or shouldn't trust, or interventions that they should or shouldn't take? Yes, Carolina, and then Umang, and then we'll move on.
Well, so I mean, I'm not so convinced with with some of the comments related with that chatbots are not used for research, because I mean, it doesn't matter whether the developer says, this is not for researchers or for a judge to use it for a court order or a sentence, because they're actually used. So it doesn't, I mean, if the purpose, if the needs of the user, and they can tweak their way around the platform. And then we've seen this disastrous cases where we've seen judges in judiciary systems that have no regulation whatsoever for using generative AI, large language models to build their sentences. So I mean, I just want to bring this in because I think we need to sort of think of precisely the question of whether and how the AI system can circumscribe its limits and view of use to avoid this kind of very difficult cases that we've seen in the past months.
Thank you. It's sort of like designing seatbelts. You know, you hope everyone wears them. Sometimes people don't. Umang, is there anything you'd like to comment on that? And then I'll move us to the topic of data privacy. Of course, these are all related.
Yeah, no, there's one thing I'd want to add is that there's this, a lot of the language-based systems that we have been interacting with, like Siri and Alexa, for example, they do caveat that they might not know the answer to your query, so they're going to search the web. Effectively, this is a fast way of saying, I really don't know what you're saying. So my base case is going to be just to search the web for whatever I think you're trying to get at. And I think that if we start to build these kinds of affordances into our experiences with large language models and other kinds of more sophisticated chatbots, we'll be able to like have these caveated conversations. And then I think it comes back to the conversation we were having earlier, where it's actually up to local communities and cultures to decide what they're willing to and not willing to have outputted by their chatbot. And sometimes you might have systems that are like, are you sure you want to see this? And if you even look on X these days, for example, they might have, would you like to see graphic content? They now kind of filter it, and you can say it's this, see a graphic image. This is an affordance for seeing something that maybe not everybody in that community wants to see. It's maybe not something illicit, which would be taken off the web, so it's kind of out of bounds for everybody. But there are these like kind of frictions that we've put in place that kind of remind us that, hey, I'm actually might be interacting with something I'm not used to, or I'm not allowed to, or I might not be comfortable with.
Thank you, Umang. And Giuliano, I'm going to move us on to the next topic here for the sake of time. Let's think a little bit about data privacy, which we have been, of course, so far, but also with the question of using data for more personalized experiences. So we have a question from the US that is, can AI work without tampering with my data? And then we have some questions from Germany that are essentially asking for the panelists' opinions about personalized chatbots. How would you decide between a standardized approach and a personalized approach? What are the pros and cons? Does anyone like to come in and share their perspectives on that?
So I really want to, I'm sorry to go back to a previous question. I really want to push back on localizing to everything, including extremist views. This is where I would put my foot down, for example, on human rights issues. And there is a really strong problem of amplifying social norms being social engineering. And I would really want to avoid the kinds of incredibly discriminatory, leading to inciting violent content that can come out of language models that we've seen research from, for example, from the Middlebury Institute, is very easy for language models to very convincingly put out incredibly discriminatory content that can lead to harm in real life. So I really strongly push back on everything being localized. And on the data privacy side, there's a problem of data collation where on the research and industry just doesn't have good tools for data set evaluation at this large scale that we see in language model training data sets. So when we're talking about private information, likely that's going to be fed into, going back to language models, unsure about rules-based chatbots, that's likely going to be fed into at a later layer, later stage in training. So that'll likely be fine-tuning data. There's a huge problem. I think what needs to be prioritized is how do you determine what PII looks, how do you even find that in 1 terabyte of data in the training data? How much data do you need for an effective chatbot for whatever you're trying to do with it? And also consent here. There's been a tendency for opt-out, and what informed consent here looks like, since the majority of folks, historically, it's not their job to know the technical side of how their data is used, and what opting looks like, but having better, more consumable guidance. We work a lot on data set documentation at Hugging Face, model cards and data sheets. So making it very consumable to the average user with very little technical background to be able to understand how their data is being used is really critical.
Thanks for giving us that lay of the land, Irene. So I guess to break it down, the personalization we have, because I think this question might have been being asked in the context of individual level personalization, but it's also very possible, as Irene mentions, that you have like the personalization is based on something from the local level. So we have these different levels of no personalization, maybe personalization to the area, and then personalization to you. Giuliano, do you have any other thoughts on this?
Yes, just answering very clear. Of course, AI could work and can work and works without personal data. For instance, autonomous vehicles do not use usually personal data, and you can have chatbots without using personal data. You can have systems that recommend movies without using personal data. But of course, everything, the efficiency of the system for a particular use may be enhanced with personal data. And this may be an option by the user herself. For instance, I would like to receive recommendations of movies based on my previous choices. So it depends how it's possible to find a way. I think there should be autonomy by the user. And for that to be effective, the developers and providers should give options on how invasive within personal data the system will be, so the user could choose between having more general systems that do not use personal data and maybe not very efficiently, but choosing also to deliver personal data in order to have more efficient or more adapted to their needs.
Thank you, Giuliano. And Umang?
Yeah, I think because I agree with actually what both Irene and Giuliano said here. In some sense, personalization has to be done within the guardrails of not only local regulation, but also within the guardrails of what the international and larger community believes in. So if you do want to see like particular forms of content, like that might be prohibited entirely, all flat out. And plus one to Irene's points on that. I think there's an interesting statement to be made around when we are personalizing, what are we referring to as personal data here? Because a lot of the firms that are using chatbots might be co-referencing other data you may have given them access to. And I think it comes down to a question of like, are you aware that your Google Maps data or your data for maps are being used to personalize your experiences elsewhere on certain products, for example? And I think that that can also be considered personal information, and it's not necessarily maybe something that comes first and it's top of mind, but that type of usage data as well as other information that you have around you viewing particular posts for certain amounts of time being something that is used to tailor your chatbot experience. That if they're talking about that type of data, like that may already be incorporated into some of your experiences, maybe not at the fine-tuning level, but just kind of in a standard old school chatbot style way, just making sure that you're having an experience that's tailored to you and the community that you live in.
Thank you, Mong. That's a really helpful point about what kind of personalization we are talking about. We have, I think this is going to be our last question. And I want to dig in on this point that Irene started here about consent and what it could look like, because we have, you might have different types of consent for different types of personalization. Some of the proposals are about using users' past conversations with AI chatbots to offer best experiences. Others are about using their, online activity. But how do we know, and whether, depending on if they're informed, but how do we know if they're informed? Is this just like reading a long list of terms and conditions? Is it a pop-up that comes up? What should count as consent in these situations? I know this is a tough question. Christina.
It's going to be an incredibly difficult question, because you're also looking at not only, as Irene mentioned, vulnerable populations, you're looking at age. Do you want children to have access to the exact same information that adults are going to have access to? You also have issues with individuals who may not realize that the chatbots are not really human and develop relationships. This is something that has been brought up as an issue. And you're also going to be dealing with who regulates the consent, right? So I'm Cuban American. If someone is the human rights community in Cuba wants to have access to a freedom of expression site that is otherwise prohibited by the government, is the government going to have a hand in dictating what kind of access, what kind of consent, so to speak, has to be, who is the gatekeeper? So I think, like with Facebook and X and all the social media platforms, this is going to be a question that is going to be raised. It's going to have to be raised very early on, and it's going to be ultimately a matter of a combination of engineering, ethical questions, and also having an informed population.
Thank you, Christina. And Giuliano, this might be our last comment.
Okay, well, there's a difficult trade-off here. Of course, we're not looking for only consent, but informed consent. So you're right that people are not used to read too much to understand what is going to be collected or inferred from the data. But nevertheless, if we just use pop-ups with icons, then we cannot make sure that the consent is really informed. So there is a trade-off, and particularly with AI, where AI has a power of inference to infer many information from particular sets of personal data. So it's a very difficult question. It's very difficult to find the balance between what you should inform before consent and whether this consent is really aware of the consequences regarding personal data.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. I'm sorry, Carolina. I just want to say this has been a very wonderful discussion, and I'm looking forward to the panel tomorrow as well, which will have some familiar faces. Thank you for your contributions and thoughtful dialogue here. I feel like this has been a very respectful but informative conversation. I want to remind participants that they are going to be reconvening in their small groups to discuss some of what you've heard just now over the next 30 minutes or so. I also want to remind particularly participants from Germany and Spain that the Central European summertime ends tomorrow. So please make sure to log on an hour earlier than you did today. So your Sunday deliberation session will start at 5 p.m. CET. So I know we all forget about that sometimes, but it's actually kind of important. So for the participants, in order to rejoin your small group discussion, you will be clicking on the same link that the Stanford deliberation platform link that was in your email that you used before. So that will take you back into your small groups. Thank you for attending this, and I hope you have a thought-provoking conversation in your small groups. Thank you to our panelists.